with these stories, it can be incredibly hard you can completely believe what a source is telling you, but then the part of proving it can be really, really difficult. We took a different approach when we were doing our big investigation, which we went to the public record to see, because my colleague Callum Cuddiford had done a FOI to all of the councils about whether they had any grooming gangs investigations. Now, they all came back and said they either couldn't find information on it or they didn't have any, which was very strange, because when we started digging into the council's own documents, we found stuff like Hounslow Council had produced a magazine in the mid-2010s where they had literally described a grooming gang story of a real case study and reported that they'd had more people that had come forward about that. Now, fast forward to when Callum did his FOI, Hounslow Council were the only ones that came back and said, oh, we did actually have a grooming gang investigation. As he probed it, they said, oh, no, actually, that was a resident of Hounslow and it didn't exist there. So what had happened that their own communications had said this, and then that they were going round jumping through hoops to explain that they didn't have this issue. And this is, I think, one of the key things with London, which is it's been there the whole time. And actually, when you go back through and you look at the old media reports, it's just referred to in a different way. We just didn't have the terms. And the remarkable thing is, actually, a lot of councils, after what happened in Rochdale and what happened in Rotherham, they started looking into it themselves and they produced reports on it. But then all of a sudden, it just went quiet, and then it suddenly became, this doesn't exist here. And so, we've put all of the kind of sources of the stuff that we've looked at, and I would encourage everyone to look at it for themselves. But that is a thing that really needs to be pushed, is we need transparency about what was known by these organisations. I think the important question is, why is it still happening, right? And I'll go through it and some of the stuff that we dug up, and one of those was that the Sunday Times ran on its front page that Levi Belfield was linked to a grooming gang in West London, right? That had a report from a council worker that said that the group involved in that, because they had not faced any kind of justice, because they were out there committing their crimes and it was so well known, they felt untouchable. Those are literally the words that were used by that council worker. And the problem that we've had here is we have not acknowledged the problem. Like I say, you get, the head of the Met here, he sat here years back and said it's not something that he sees. So what happened there? Yeah. Why was he not seeing it? Why did the mayor think that there was no indication and that we had these type of gangs in London? Because all of us were able to find it. And we need a big prosecution. The police need to bring people to justice. And once that happens, the floodgates will open.
Do you want to come in at this stage before I bring in Assemblymember Roberts?
Yeah, thank you. We've just been talking about how you collated your evidence and validated it. And I think one of the things that ties these grooming cases together is the public institutions and the lack of trust and the overlooking that's happened there. So I wondered, in your investigations, which, by the way, thank you to all the work that all of you have done, in your investigations, did you find in London that there was the same kind of neglect or overlooking in those public institutions? And to what extent is that still happening? Or, because Charlie, you were saying that social workers were actually very keen to bring you evidence, which I suppose recognises a change from what we've seen in other areas in the past. So how open did you find public institutions? I don't know if anyone wants to come in.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Survivors often don't trust people, authorities, police, social workers. They really, it takes a lot for them to even speak to us, let alone speak to people who are actively really trying to help them and change their lives. What I found from my investigation was that there was a hesitancy, if you like, on behalf of some of these girls to tell their stories in such detail that they sometimes told me, that they were worried about stating certain facts to social workers, for example. They were worried about being judged. And I think that looms large. I think there is a real issue with feeling as if you're being judged by people in authority. But saying that, I also agree with Charlie. I mean, in some cases, social workers are right at the heart of this, and they're the ones that are kind of encouraging these girls to go further and to report their cases to the police if they can.
Just to pick up on there, do you see that sort of institutional failure in London where social workers were referring to these predators as boyfriends and things like that? Or so there was still those failings quite present.
Yeah.
And how open were institutions about those failings with you when you were looking for evidence?
Okay.
Absolutely not open at all. I mean, the problem that we have in London is that it became acceptable to just deny that this was happening. The children's services departments at the councils in all of your wards will know that this has happened. And what they did after the scandals in Rochdale and Rotherham is they set up these safeguarding boards. And on paper, they're a really good idea, right? You've got the police in there, you've got children's services, you've got NHS, all the people that should be able to join the dots and bring things together. Big problem is transparency. I can't FOI them. So we don't know what they've done, how effective they've been, and all we know is what they put forward. So I think the thing that really needs to be demanded in London are the same levels of transparency that occurred in Rochdale and Rotherham. There needs to be cleaning of house because, yes, it's the same pattern that you always see, which is the child comes, the social worker will often be, or the children's home will be aware of the abuse that's going on. They'll kind of overlook it or, not deal with it in the correct way. And then actually the only cases often that we know about are the worst ones. Like I've seen in Rachel's work, in the work that we've done, serious case reviews. When the child dies, they cannot hide that information anymore. It ends up on the public record. That is disgraceful that is the only time that we get transparency around what has gone on in some of these areas.
Thank you all very much. And just in terms of, is there any data available either within London or nationally of what proportion of people, say, have been in the care system who have been abused in this way?
So the problem that we have in London is that we've just not got a handle on this issue. I mean, the reason that you've got journalists that are sat in front of you today is because there's not been an acknowledgement of this issue in London. So we've not, therefore, had the kind of studies, the reports that need to, in places like Rochdale and Rotherham, there have been massive reckonings, there have been independent inquiries. We've not had that. So we're providing you with the information because there aren't those other people that might be able to come in and give you more information on that. Well, that was certainly in my experience.
Just a quick question, Zak. Following up on what you said earlier about, and I think, you've now opened another can of worms on this as well, but people within the care sector being involved, either through facilitating or direct involvement within the gang, how big of an issue is that in London?
Absolutely massive. Absolutely massive. One of the issues is because it's a wild west out there in terms of some of these care homes, and they can be very easily infiltrated by people with bad intentions. And get some people from the care sector, up here and ask them, because they will lay it out for you in greater detail with a raft of cases. When we took the grooming gang cases, we took them to Maggie Oliver, but we also took them to a guy called Chris Wilde, who's really an amazing campaigner and within the care space. And what was so chilling about what he would say was he'd look through them and go, "Oh, well, that's very common. Yeah, that I know about 20 of those." It's absolutely huge. But yeah, in terms of people on the inside, it's terrifyingly massive. And then it comes down to that transparency part, which is it's only when we get whistleblowers that come forward. We don't really know how many investigations there might have taken place into this stuff because they don't have to make it public.
Thanks. Charlie, is there anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think within the care sector, in terms of frontline workers, there are so many instances that we've seen, both in the capital and fellow panellists have gone through those already, but also around the country, of just horrendous attitudes among some frontline workers, deeply misogynistic, judgmental of the children they're caring for, see them as troublemakers who can't be contained, basically, and what they get is what they deserve if they fail to follow the rules. I mean, that is the attitude that we've seen time and time again in so many cases. Luckily, some of them quite a while ago now. You'd hope that some attitudes have improved. But there are also, of course, untold numbers of frontline workers who are trying their hardest. But I don't think we appreciate the threat that some of them are facing, the risk that they're enduring. It's not just about, trying to do the right thing. It's, if I do the right thing, might I be the victim of a violent attack? For the second time, I'll praise great work by the BBC today. But recently, a report they did in terms of high street crime investigators, standards and licensing dealing with vape shops, organised criminal gangs that use these stores for widespread criminal activity were threatening these investigators, phoning them up at midnight saying, "I will kill you." There's no doubt in my mind that care workers who are causing trouble will be facing that same level of intimidation. We have seen similar cases like it around the country. Some of the social workers I spoke to you about before who wanted to come forward did so because enough time had passed. They no longer felt so much at risk to do so. They're no longer working in the sector. They no longer had that responsibility. I think that's something we need to understand. And again, we are relying on whistleblowers there, of course, and those who are very cautious about sharing these cases. But it does happen. If you see, cars pulling up to your care home and you know that the men taking children away are ruthless, organised criminal gangs involved in serious violence and drug dealing, the movement of heroin and guns, and you are a care worker, who's going to take that fight on?
Thanks. And just, yeah.
I'll just add one point to that, which is to do with just how aggressive some of these care companies can be to whistleblowers with legal threats and all the rest of it. And what we really need to be doing, and this goes beyond care, we need to protect whistleblowers in this country. Like, far too often, they are left to take it all on their shoulders. And we, as journalists, often have to kind of, we try and persuade them to do it, but ultimately it's their choice. And I think in the care sector, when a whistleblower comes forward, that is really difficult. And they often know that there will be people with a vested interest, sometimes with a criminal interest, that will try to silence them.
Well, what we mustn't lose sight of is that this has gone on for decades. Pointing fingers at anybody in particular isn't helpful. What we've got to do is to get everybody to accept that this is actually happening and try and find a way that we can stop it happening, or finding a way of dealing with this, because these poor children, I know you've spoken to many, I certainly have, and it is heartbreaking. And at some point, this has got to stop, and I would suggest sooner rather than later. I'm going to start off the questions. The next section is how offenders operate. You've answered some of this. Based on your research, how do grooming gangs in London operate in practice? So is there anything different? I know you've answered some of this, so you needn't repeat that. And how did the grooming gangs you reported on coordinate their activity? And you have actually mentioned how they all seem to, well, they don't all know each other, do they? One of the gangs I was dealing with, a multicultural gang, and to be fair, the girls weren't all white either. It was a multicultural thing altogether. And they were together, but they weren't together in that bond that we do see in some of the groups. So do you see that as any difference in London? Because obviously we're concentrating on London. Do you see that there isn't that family ties as much in some of the groups? I know we do have the Rotherham type model here, but in the other groups, are they much looser in connection with each other?
I think what you need to understand about with these gangs is that the members of the group will often be groomed themselves to be a part of it. So there's one group that operate. I'm not going to say where it was, but how that worked, that was generational. So that went back. There was a particularly vile sex offender who was operating in the 1970s, the 1980s. In the 1980s, he then kind of had a protege who then kind of assumed like a kind of leadership position within that. And then as as we went into the 2000s, there was another group of young men within that area. And why were they connected? Well, they were connected through elements of criminality. They could be socially connected. And so I think we've got to be careful about saying this is the model or this is the way that it works. There are definitely, you get patterns that you see repeated. But I think the most common pattern that you get is the method of abuse, of targeting these vulnerable young girls. And also just, it's like, these will be complicated networks that won't all follow the same pattern. And London is massive and complicated.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, London is, as Zak says, large and diverse, and the way that the gangs operate is diverse as well. There is obviously the targeting of vulnerable young people, predominantly in care, is a big part of it. As I think I mentioned earlier, hanging outside pupil referral units and places like that. And it is all sort of tied up, a lot of it as well, within the county lines model, where they are, young boys are targeted to sell drugs and for other criminal activity, and girls are targeted for sex. So I think there is no, as Zak said, there is no one distinct model that we see. We see lots of different ones across the city, and certainly in my research, it showed that.
Yeah, I think the thing that I come to, right, is why is it on the children to be coming forward?
Yeah, yes.
All of them will have had adults, people in their lives that can see that and see it's wrong. Shouldn't be on them to come forward. I think that it's missing. The opportunities are always there at the time, and I refuse to believe that there'd be any situation where a child could hide that type of relationship all the way through to the point that they just realise it years later. There has always been some failing by the adults that were around that child to do something about it.
Yeah, and the shocking thing is a couple of people in specifics were in care homes. And I think that's something we have got to be looking at, the evidence you're giving on care homes. And I said to one of them, well, how were you allowed out? And she said, well, we used to say we're going to see our boyfriends, and they knew. And they knew they came back in the middle of the night. And I said, when you think this can't be right. I said, well, didn't they say anything? Didn't they stop you? Didn't they try and talk to you about it? And they said, no, because we were with our boyfriends. And that's what they believed at the time. So one of the things that's definitely come out of this is I think we should be looking with regard to care homes. But there's so much we need to be looking at here.
But Susan, I think it's important to say, though, that it's like there will be people that might not have been able to protect the children. It's not always that they just accepted it. I think part of the problem is that a lot of these workers will probably be browbeaten by, like, oh my God, they raised the alarm to begin with and then nothing happened, or they went to their manager and they told them, and that's part of it. It's like these structural things that prevent people coming forward, or and that we should always say, so many fantastic people within that space too.
Yeah.
To some extent, it has already been answered, but I'll still put it to you. What was your experience working with and liaising with the Met as part of your investigations, and how did this compare with other experiences you had across the country?
Now, if I could I know some of you have already answered this, so if you could keep it as short as you can.
I mean, I think that let's look forward, let's do better. I think it's been found lacking in areas, but we can improve it, we can do it. Let's give the Met the boost to go out and get a load of these grooming gangs and really do a good job.
Yeah, we've heard a lot from the Commissioner about how there is improvements going on in this area, and I hope that they do come to fruition.
Third, both of those responses, I think the Met has demonstrated a greater interest in dealing with this. They've demonstrated a greater sense of concern. I think what needs to happen now, obviously, to gain the trust of the victims and survivors who are speaking to us, is to see that interest turned into sufficient action.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's now just before 1 o'clock, and I do assure all of you the London Assembly will be giving this our focus. I'd like to really thank you all, and of course Seema, for attending today's meeting and for your honest and open answers to our questions. It is absolutely essential that this is taken forward, not only for the victims that we have at the moment, but for future victims. And we must deal with the culture of silence, because I do believe that that is what is causing this to have gone on for so long.